Hi guys, good evening. I just want to go over some stock picks from today with you. They were earnings plays and a couple of stocks that we are currently holding that I wanted to give you an update on. So we'll go ahead and start with Zillow. This is a stock that we've talked about for a couple of days now. Um, if you remember, it had earnings on 2 days ago and fell pretty hard down to this long-term trend line on the daily, and we played it as a bounce trade yesterday up above the high of the day before. So we bought in around 50 with an option, an in-the-money option, 90 delta option, and we still actually have it. The action today was kind of bad in the morning, as you can see. This is the daily chart intraday on the left, 5-minute chart. You can see it kind of spiked up slightly and then just sold off hard in the beginning of the day down below our entry point of $50. I gave it a few minutes just because of the speed of this drop, and it actually did bounce right back up above the resistance of 5106. Kind of trended around this and then ground up a little bit to 5144 here. Again, our target is 5205 or the 200-day moving average, which is right around 5205. But towards the end of the day, you can see we had some sell-off in the stock back down to the 50-50 range. That sell-off corresponded with a little bit of a sell-off in the market. So, we're just going to hold on to this since it didn't stay down in this range here and managed to kind of come back up. And it actually, if you look at the daily chart, it's a pretty decent sign. I mean, granted, the high of today was lower than the high of yesterday, which I don't like to see, but I'm going to give it one more day to see how it acts. If it can get up above this level here, 5150, then we'll hold on to it for, either a gap fill or just a little bit more of a move towards the upside. So that's Zillow. Yesterday, we also talked about two earnings plays. One was Roku, and the other one was Booking.com. So with Roku, if you recall, we talked about how it looked like it had an inverted head and shoulders pattern forming. We can just scoot this back a little bit, and you can see just from prior to today's move what it looked like. So it looked like that. So it looked like it was going to form an inverted head and shoulders based on the momentum from the night before, which was last night after earnings. You can see here is the earnings pop, and it kind of was hovering around here. And the call yesterday was that I thought it would pop up above this. If it did pop up above this resistance, which was the thought that I had just based on the pattern and, the inverted head and shoulders, cup and handle, whatever you want to call it. And so my call was to buy this stock on the open after the first 1 or 5 minute high for an upside, for a long rather, up to the 57.44 pivot or even the all-time high of 58.80. My target was 58.80 or higher, but as you can see, it's kind of just hanging around here. It actually had some really good action today. This is a 15-minute chart, but I did buy into it very early in the day, probably right around this 53.50 area right here. If you look at the 1-minute chart, you can see kind of a little bit better where I bought into it. Yeah, right around this consolidation range. As it pulled back to this first pullback is where I went ahead and got in. And I actually got in again with an option on this versus the stock directly. So this actually turned out to be a really nice play. I'm holding it for a swing trade just based on its action because it just kind of is forming a bull flag right now. It's a very strong open and then just consolidation throughout the day. So my target for this stock is for it to at least hit the all-time high of 58.80. Because it looks like a inverted head and shoulders, it could potentially spike up. So you can see here my one lowly option that I purchased. I have a sell price on it where it would mean the stock would be around $60. So that's where I'm targeting. You could also put a you throw a Fibonacci sequence on it, a Fibonacci extension, to see, to put in some other target areas. If I could find it, here we go. So I'm going to do it from the low of this Head and Shoulders pattern to the high 58.80 that it got to. So the first extension level is about 65.60. So that's really it's a possibility that it could extend out to the 65 level, or even up into the 70s, based on this type of a pattern and a move and a momentum name, as Roku is. It's a tech name. It's got momentum. It's involved in the space of streaming and online content. So it's possible. You see there's heavy volume today off the earnings, even when the market itself was very low in volume. And so we'll see how it acts tomorrow. And if it breaks above 58.80, we'll look to hold it over the weekend, and potentially for a play or a grind higher into this first extension. But we'll see if it doesn't have momentum. So for example, if it does something like this, where it pops up and then starts to kind of come down, obviously we would want to sell it prior to that, any kind of move. The fact that I have an option and not the stock means I have to be concerned with time. So I only have a certain limited amount of time for this trade until my theta value, or the time value, comes out of the option. It's a short term. I believe it's a weekly. It's at the end of next week that it expires. So I still have a couple of days here. I'd prefer to get rid of it tomorrow if I could, prior to the weekend. And that will probably be my goal. And then I can always re-enter on any pullback, because this is a strong stock and a good pattern. So any break above 58.80 would provide an opportunity for me to move into just a little bit of a longer term option. This was just an earnings play, which is why I picked the short term option. So that's Roku. Turned out really well. We're in the green on that one. The next one was Booking.com. So that's the old Priceline. We talked about yesterday the fact that it was supposed to report earnings after the bell yesterday. And so you can see here was the action after the bell yesterday. It went down. Okay. It went down considerably, even just on the news that it did not have an earnings report. So it went down from 2041 all the way down to 1985, just based on that. So my thought for this stock was that it was going to go down back into this gap area right here, where this gray box is. That's a gap. I thought that it would at least go into this gap, if not all the way down past this longer term trend line, which is this thicker red line, and then potentially even down to this shorter term trend line, which is this thinner red line underneath it. So the better move for me would have been if it would have held around 1985 and then kind of worked its way down in the morning. But because earnings were delayed, it actually had earnings this morning. And you can see the action on that stock this morning was a really heavy, downturn in the stock, all the way down to 1,807. So spiked down right when earnings were released to 1,807, and then just kind of a really hard bounce back up into this range here above this shorter term uptrend line right here. So at the open, it actually opened in between these two trend lines right here, and just before the gap. So in the morning, I'm going to put it on a 5-minute chart. In the morning, it actually started to go into the gap, and then quickly reversed out of the gap and started to go down. I actually did preemptively buy a put option on this on this second bar here. Usually and this is what I get for not really following my own rules, right? So my rules say you're supposed to wait for the first 5 or 15-minute bar to be breached to make a trade either way, up or down. So this did not go below that first 5-minute bar, which is at 1900. It actually just went shy of it at 1906, and then started going back into the gap and just kind of hovering around, this longer term trend line, as well as like just in the bottom of this gap here. Around midday, it started popping a little bit along with the market. And it's actually, I got stopped out. So I stopped out. My stop was above the first 5-minute high. So the first 5-minute high was my stop for that put, actually. So I did lose a little money there, but Roku more than made it up. So as you can see, Booking.com is kind of in the gap here. It's still kind of weak. If you look at a 15 or even 30-minute chart on this one, it shows somewhat of a bear flag. It looks like a pretty clear bear flag to me. So we'll be looking for continued downtrend. I personally think this stock is going to go down eventually because it had such a huge move to the downside off of earnings. I think this is just a relief rally. Didn't really show too much strength today. Just had a little bit of drifting to the upside and a few tiny bounces, pops rather. So I'm still going to look for this to go down. This isn't the best action, but it could do. You never know. It just depends on how the market acts. This has been a very slow market, very light volume today as well. One of the lightest volumes of the year. So it could be because of that. So I'm just going to keep an eye on this and see how it trades tomorrow and the day after. So usually after a big move like this, I give it a few days to settle out, and then the action that happens after that, will be what I go by for the any kind of swing trade. I am looking for this stock to go back below this trend line, and actually now I'm probably going to wait for it to get below the 1880 level before I make any kind of short trade on it, because of this little bit of a strength here that it's shown. So I want to see it kind of reverse course back down and then break down below this shorter term trend line for a short trade down to the 1870 pivot, 1826 pivot, and even down to 1732. Honestly, my goal here would be around 1800 or 1825, because just there's a little gap here that it might bounce on a gap fill. So and also it kind of, if you look at the gap today, the Fibonacci extension down on that gap is the 61% extension goes down right where the 1826 gap fill line is. So that's BKNG. I did not wasn't the best trade today for me. I kind of got a little ahead of myself, but I will still keep this on watch, and we'll go from there. Lastly on the list today was Yelp. I had that on my view on this that it would go short, that I wanted to trade it to the short side rather. I wanted to go short on Yelp off the bounce that it had, the gap that it had rather, after earnings. Obviously that did not work. My theory on the stock is that Yelp is I'm not the biggest fan of that company. I don't think that it like from its stock performance rather, not, Yelp itself is fine, but the actual stock chart itself is just messy, and I was not a big fan of of the movement here. So what I proposed yesterday was that it could potentially bounce up to this red downtrend line or this blue pivot here at 48.40, and then it could reverse from that for a short trade back down into underneath that downtrend line, or even just back down to this line here, which is an uptrend line from previously. So it did not do that. Instead, Yelp was quite strong into the open and has done pretty much exactly what Roku did, is just a strong up move with a consolidation. So pretty good, well-defined bull flag there. It is hovering around 48.40 though. It did pop above it, but it closed right at 48.33, which is technically below the 48.40 pivot. I mean, it did pierce that pivot, so not the best action for a short. But I will keep a look. I'll just keep a lookout and see, how it moves, because, honestly, it could consolidate right around here or even go down further. But if it does stay up, and I think I mentioned this yesterday in the video, if it does stay up above 48.40, it has a really big window. If you kind of take the time frame out to, like, let's just do max available. You can see here, I mean, this is a huge, opportunity for it to go to the upside. It has an opportunity to, go up anywhere in this area here. I mean, it has some congestion here, but not, it's pretty quick move to the downside. So, and then on the opposite side, pretty quick move to the upside. So it has had a lot of volatility in this area. So there is some congestion there, but it's pretty wild. So, there's not a really clearly defined pivot. I might pick 57.64 right here as a pivot potentially in this area. So around the 57 area could be a potential pivot point. So having a target, if you're interested in going long Yelp, you could go long Yelp here over 48.40 with your stop, below that pivot of 48.40, and you have about an $8 target, which is pretty good. So I'm just going to wait and see what Yelp does. That's a pretty strong move today. Probably have some consolidation in Yelp over the next coming days, and then see what happens. Okay, so those were the 3 trades that we looked at today for earnings plays, post earnings plays. I have, as you all know from the last video, I'm also still holding GDX, which is the gold miners ETF. So just to kind of remind everybody, I went short by buying a buying an in the money put in GDX, long-term put in GDX. Actually, I'm a few months out. So you can see here at this breakdown below this pivot point of $20.90, you can see it hit a few times this pivot and then finally broke 2 days ago. So I went short on GDX 2 days ago. And my stop was actually going to be, my conservative stop was actually going to be $20.90. But usually when I, short a stock at a breakdown, the stop would be up here at the high of the day that I bought it. So that's technically 21.09 would be my stop. I did say I was going to use 20.90 as a stop, but the action today actually proved to be pretty interesting. It did spike up really hard, pretty hard early in the day, but I gave it some time. I just used this 21.01 as my alert to say if it goes above 21.01, I'm just going to go ahead and sell out of it. But because of the sudden move to the upside, which isn't really for any reason today, I just wanted to give it an opportunity to settle down and potentially move back down to the downside. And that's exactly what it did. Granted, it's still not below yesterday's low, but it is below this 20.90 pivot. So this is really not the best action in GDX and not what I had really planned for. But as you can see, it's kind of a choppy stock in general, or ETF in general. It moves in a choppy manner. So I'm giving a little wiggle room here in this area around that pivot, which is pretty long term, and it's a well-defined pivot. So Still hanging on to my GDX short, and I will keep y'all posted on that. So, moving on to tomorrow, which is August 10th, and it's also a Friday. We have a few stocks that we want to look at for earnings, post-earnings, potential move, pretty strong moves off of the earnings. So, these stocks actually have already reported earnings, and tomorrow we're going to be looking to do the same thing that we did with some of the stocks today, is take advantage of that move and look for some trades. So first up is Dropbox. That's DBX. This stock is pretty new. It IPO'd this year, I believe, in March. So it doesn't have a lot of history on the stock chart. The only really couple of defined lines I could draw was this downtrend line from the all-time high of 43.50 to today's high, which is here at 34.84ish. So honestly, that's the only line I could draw. So if you take a look, and then of course this 34.84 pivot here or around that point. If you take a look, and this is not the best chart, to be perfectly honest. However, if you take a look at Dropbox and the action it had off the earnings report, it grinded up pretty much all day from 31 all the way to 34.84, and it spiked up to 37.12 out of the gate after earnings were reported, and then just quickly reversed and went all the way back down to 30.45, and now it's just kind of hovering right around here. So depending on what it does in the morning, we'll see how to proceed, or if we will even proceed. My inclination on this trade would be to fade any upside, as long as it stays below this 34.84 pivot or this downtrend line. So right now it's set to gap down right around 31.22. So that's just right now. Obviously the morning could bring something else, so it will gap down potentially right till here. So if it fades right out of the open, you pretty much have a window all the way down here to the very first low that this stock had, which is down in the very beginning of March, 27.74, and then you have another pivot down here at the all-time low, which is 26.61. So it could potentially fade all the way back down here, or even up to this 27.74 level. Again, the stock is not very well defined, the chart, so really just depends. So that's Dropbox. An interesting, it's a tech name, so it could move. Next is the Trade Desk. So Trade Desk obviously knocked it out of the park with earnings. Had a huge move. That's a $20 move off the earnings this evening. So it is, and it's strong. It didn't just move and consolidate. It just spiked up and is just continuing to go higher in the overnight extended hours session, which will be over in about 45 minutes. So on the right side is the chart of the Trade Desk. I'm going to open up the weekly chart so you can see it is again a new IPO from last year, it looks like, and it is not, it's pretty volatile, it's choppy here, but it's in an uptrend. And just looking at the longer term trend line from the very beginning opening of the stock all the way till right now, this thick red line is the uptrend line that it's been following. So I also have drawn a Fibonacci retracement from the low of 22 to the high of 97.87. Obviously, this stock is well above that right now. It's at 112.85. So this, and on the left side, you can see this thick red line here is that trend line, the long-term trend line on the right, uptrend. The extension, the Fibonacci extension, the first extension at 23 is all the way up here at 115 around. So potentially, for me, this is a difficult play, just because it's at an all-time high. It's moved very hard to the upside, and there's really no resistance. So it could just go, keep going. It could gap and keep going. What I'm going to be looking for is if there's any weakness around this 115 area, which is where that first extension level is, or even like in the morning if it tends to drift down lower, and comes down to this trend line, I'd be looking for a bounce. Like if it happens to come down to this trend line and bounce, I would probably trade any bounce off of this trend line to the upside. If it shows significant weakness, that's another thing. But if it's able to maintain this trend line here, I'd be looking for a bounce. Now, if it keeps going, personally, I'm not going to trade it, but you could, if you wanted to, do a gap and go trade is what I call it, where it's gapping up all the way to $113 or so. And you could trade it, over the first 5-minute bar, or even 1-minute bar, if you want to trade it, to the upside. For if it doesn't go down and it continues to go up, just buy the first higher bar above the first 1-minute or 5-minute bar, and trade it and put your stop below that first 5-minute bar or 1-minute bar. Pretty easy trade. Since you don't have any levels really. If it keeps going, I mean, it could go as high as it wants, honestly. And so you would just need to keep trailing that stop up. But initially, your stop could be right after that first 5-minute or 1-minute bar. So that's the trade desk. It's a little difficult for me to trade this because I don't really see any edge in it for me. There's no clearly defined lines, and it's quite high right now from where it closed. Okay, next stock is Planet Fitness. It's PLNT. This stock has already done what I wanted it to do tomorrow. So initially it had spiked up to 53 off of the earnings report. So Planet Fitness is a gym, where you are able to kind of get in any time of the day, 24 hours a day. You just need card access, and that's about it. So it's a pretty low budget health club, which is popping up all over the place. So this stock has been, as you can see, this is a weekly. It's been on just a real tear from 2016, where it was $13. It's now $50. I personally need to see a little bit of weakness in this stock if I were to trade it, because I just don't see it going, any further higher. That's my thesis on the stock. It's personal opinion. But if I'm to look at the daily chart on Planet Fitness, right now it actually has dropped down to 50. So it is still up from the close of 48.79, but it's down below this trend line, which is where it was actually above at the very beginning of the earnings reporting. So my trade was initially that in the morning, if it were to come back down below 53, back down below this red trend line at 51.65, I would trade it for a fade off of that. So now that it's already come down, it's light trading, it looks like, but it could kind of trend up in the morning. So what I would be looking for is a, trend back up towards this trend line, or towards a, moving average, 50 or 20 moving average on the 5-minute chart, 15-minute chart, either one. So I'd look for kind of just a little bit of a, slight grind higher, and then a reversal. So I would be looking to fade any strength in this stock as long as it stays below this red trend line. So that is Planet Fitness. My first target. Let's just talk about some targets. So it's my first target to the downside for this stock, if it gets up to this trend line, would be this pivot here. So it would be 49.71. So that would probably be a $1 target. I'm expecting that it will go lower than that, but that will be my first line in the sand to say, okay, is it going to go further, or is it stopping right here? Next target is down here at 47.51 at that pivot. And then below that, you have a pivot at 45.85, about 44.50, and then down here at 47.05. So those are really the the lines that I have as targets. I mean, obviously there's many more, and of course the 50% retracement, which I don't think it's going to get to tomorrow, but you have some targets in sight here. Bounce off that at least down back to this particular pivot would be very reasonable for a quick dollar plus play, and then potentially even down below to 46, which is eventually where I see it going. It needs to retrace a little bit, to the just to gain a little bit more momentum back to the upside. I'd like to see it come down a little bit just from the strength it's had. As you can see, it's almost parabolic this year, and I think that's a little bit extended for this particular stock. So that's Planet Fitness. And lastly here we've got OLED, which is Universal LED, I believe. Universal Display, that's right. Universal Display Corporation. It's OLED. And that is the high. You can see it's been a high flyer. It's had a lot of weakness lately. This year in 2017, it's had quite a bit of weakness. I've drawn a few trend lines longer term. This red trend line, extends back to 2015. Then you have a little shorter term trend line from 2016 to the downside. Now, looking at the daily chart, you see lots of gaps, lots of weakness and gaps to the downside. There are some, pivots we can work within. I know I've got a lot of lines drawn on here, but we'll focus on this area here. Okay, so this is the chart that we're going to look at for our trade. So stock popped up to 113.65 and is just kind of hanging out in this area around 110 from a close of 101. So that's basically if it stays where it is, that means it'll be gapping up right about here at this level. So that's in between a couple of ranges. There's not really anything defined there. So I would be looking for a move to the upside off of any strength. So if it shows strength on the open, I'll look for the first 5-minute bar or a 1-minute bar and see if. Actually, in OLED, I'll probably trade the first 5-minute bar just from how volatile this stock is. So I'll wait after the first 5 minutes to see if the next bar is up above that, and then I will look to put a trade into the long side with my target being up here at 117 in that area at this pivot. You can see it's kind of it's almost at a gap here. The gap is actually at 119.14. But you've got a couple of pivot points here around 117.38. So that's what I'll be looking for, is to trade OLED to the upside for a bounce off of that, off of this resistance. I don't think it's going to go above that. It very well could, but that's my first target. Of course, if it does go above that, 119 is your next pivot, and then you have a little gap here, right here, that you can trade. So it's between this 119.14 and 122.95. So you have another couple of dollars, $3 that you could potentially take advantage of if it gets up into that gap. So my target, first target 117.38, second target 119.14. If it gets into the gap and stays in that gap, hold it, to 122.95. All right. So those are my stock trades for tomorrow, my picks for tomorrow, and a review of what I traded today. Hope that helps some of you out there, and thank you for watching. If you'd like to see more, just subscribe to the channel, and you'll be notified whenever I put a video out. Thanks again. Have a great night.